This is Platemark. My name is Ann Shafer, and I am your host. I'm an independent curator specializing in prints and printmaking. This is Series 2, a history of Western prints, and today's episode is the conclusion of our conversation on Claude Mellan. Today you get the holy face on the Sudarium, yay! The single line that emanates from Christ's nose. So prepare to be amazed. As always, any images that Tru and I talk about are over on those show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. You can also hit the support and donate button for me. Do a woman a favor. Thank you so much. I'm going to skip housekeeping this time. We'll just start rolling. Here we go.
When I say that part of the artist's job is to make visible that which cannot be seen, that's one of the things that Mellan is definitely doing. We are now to the pièce de résistance.
What you've all been waiting for.
Because this is the one that always got the students' attention, and it is depending on where you're looking, it could be called the face of Christ on St. Veronica's cloth. It could be called the Holy Face. What you're seeing will be the most extraordinary engraving feat I really have ever seen. Mellan completed it in 1649, and I think he totally and completely and utterly put himself on the map. And I think by making this, I believe he elevated the art of engraving. He took it out of what it had been for the longest time, even in spite of Dürer and Holzius and so on. It had still been seen as more of a mechanical art, not a fine art. We know, of course, now that printmaking is a fine art.
So it was the most incredible feat of engraving ever.
And it's unbelievably large. If you think about how huge this plate is. So it's almost 17 inches tall. It's 12 and a half inches wide of a sheet of copper. Now, I'm going to back this up and tell you that my first encounter with this image was walking into the art museum in Manchester when I was on a graduate school trip. It was called Builders of Empire. And I walked in the front door of this museum, and across the entire lobby, there was one wall with 4 images on it. And it was a mini exhibition that had been put on by one of the people in the museum that said, these are my 4 favorite images in our collection. It must have been a quarter of a city block. Something I saw over there just drew me to it, and I walked straight to this particular engraving. I had never seen it before. All I knew is it was reaching me across this entire lobby of this museum, and I walked up to it and realized that not only was it grabbing me from halfway across the world, but it was also pulling me closer and closer and closer until I realized that this entire image was created by a single spiraling line that began at the tip of the nose of the face of Christ. And I was just, I was thunderstruck. And I believe that the image next to it was an Ancient of Days by William Blake, and then 2 other bizarre things that, almost didn't make sense. But whoever mini curator's thing was. But I'm telling you, I'm always talking to students like, get your work up on the wall by 4 o'clock. When I walk in that room, I want to see it. So that this thing just, it drew me in unbelievably. And so, you get closer and closer, and you think, what am I seeing? And then suddenly you're realizing that literally there is one line that it spirals from the center outward. And we've talked about how ridiculous engraving is. This is an original image. This is not a reproductive print. This is something that Mellan dreamt up and realized that he has this capacity to understand better than almost any person on the face of the planet that beautiful capacity for an engraving burin to venture into copper, and depending on how much weight and speed and placement you give to the movement of this tool through the copper, which, by the way, is being placed on a leather bag that's filled with sand or something like that, so that you can rotate the plate towards the tool, that depending on how much pressure you put and how much you lean into that, the line will swell or diminish depending on how hard you're pushing it. And so when you push harder, it's going to go deeper into the plate. It's going to hold more ink. It's going to be a wider line. In much the same way if you're working with a chisel point marker, or you're playing with a fountain pen, or you're playing with a bow on an instrument, it's creating this reading that starts to build a topographical map of this individual's face. Now, mind you, this is 1649. This is not done on a computer. This is done by the force of a human's vision and their sense of commitment to a topic. And if you wanted to think about this as a mystical image of the face of Christ, and it's literally called the face of Christ on St. Veronica's cloth. You could take it as a mystical moment. You could take it as a holy fuckballs. That's an amazing technological feat, right? And here I'm actually showing a Goldilocks moment because your good buddy Rene Skelaitis put this up the other day.
He did.
On Facebook, and it's absurd and lovely and wonderful, and I'm kind of annoyed with how well he's managed to do this because it's a very even spiral. He's like, I'm pretty happy with that perfect little... What he's done is created a similar spiral, but the displaced strip of copper is rolling off. I mean, it doesn't happen.
It's a picture of the plate with the burin and the little...
it's obscene how beautifully it's okay. Imagine peeling a clementine orange and all of the peel comes off in one piece. Now, take that down to
2 millimeters?
tenth of one, down to 2 millimeters, and you're doing it on a hard piece of copper with a very sharp tool. And you realize that it is about control without tension, and about how hard you press, and how patient you are, and how fast or slow you're working, and how you understand your physical qualities and the qualities of the piece you're using and the quality of your tools and the need of the image to read a certain way. Now, as gorgeous as this is, that's a perfectly even line. It's gorgeous. It's alarmingly perfectly, the line is equal weight all the way through. Mm-hmm. But when we're looking at Mellan's, then you start to see that the thicks and the thins are starting to create the bony structures at the end of the nose, and then they move out into the cheeks and into the tear ducts, which are rimming with tears, and there's blood drops coming down from the forehead and a crown of thorn that's been jammed down on to this suffering individual's face, and then the locks of the hair coming down, and the beard that is almost each of those like a weeping tear.
Yeah.
And then that is hovering in this field of light, if you will. Well, let's go back to if you're a person of faith. You could say, okay, a Sudarium. Well, what's a Sudarium? And we call it the veil of Veronica. Sudarium, actually, you could say it's a handkerchief, or you could say it's a napkin, but it was actually a nice, high-quality piece of linen that upper-class Romans would use to mop their brows. So it's Sudarium. It's a veil. And in this case, the Sudarium is a holy relic because this is an image of the true face of Christ on the veil of Veronica. Veronica is the woman who rushed up to Christ as he was carrying the cross to Calvary, to his own crucifixion, and she went to wipe the blood and the sweat and the tears off of his face with her veil. And when she removed the veil, his face was imprinted like a print, like a photograph developing on the veil of Veronica into the true face of Christ. And
why is it called the true face?
So a woman from the crowd who believes in the Savior, who runs up to him and puts her veil on his face, and this transmission of an image is there. So take apart the name of Veronica, which is Vera Icona, the true image, and now you're building this incredibly thick bunch of meanings. Go ahead, Ann.
My question for you is, when you, and maybe we'll have to have a call with Ranus about this, because do you think that he would have drawn the circles outward on the copper to start? And isn't it possible? He couldn't have done it in one fell swoop. It's impossible, right?
No.
And couldn't he have done the single line and then
widened the absolutely? Okay. Of course, he could put that, and he'd have to be really good and really patient,
right?
Because you got to get it right back in the same groove.
Slow.
Yep, and then re-widen it. Of course, okay. Absolutely.
Right. Just checking.
I mean, let's be real here. Come on,
I mean, it is miraculous, but then when you try and break it down and think, how in the world did he actually do it?
But he also had to have known, where his values are, because you really don't see any moment here that goes astray.
Not really.
You don't. You know that he understands the bony structure of the nose, and that he understands how the plane of light moves across. And then even as we go across the planes of the eye, and the break where the eyelid starts, and the line gets wider, and we get the highlight in the iris, in the pupil, and we get the tears, and that's all created with a single spiraling line. It's
insane.
And the pathos of that, even if you don't know who this individual is, and you zero in on that, and you look at how it could be anybody who's suffering in Ukraine right now. It is suffering.
Yes.
And in a way, the artist has had to put everything on hold and put his entire self into making this image and having a belief that they're going to pull this off. Even the teeth in between the lips.
I was just noticing the teeth for the first time.
Mm-hmm. And it's good size, in 12.5 by 16. So essentially the head is life size. Mm-hmm. And then if we go back to the thought of how he's created the image of the blood, sweat, and tears of Christ, and it's not a really good band from the 70s, which I always loved, and then I realized, oh, look at that. But, in a way, it is this peculiar kind of photograph, which is akin to the Shroud of Turin. It's the Veil of Veronica is considered a holy relic. I don't know where it resides, but if you buy this print, you essentially have that. So it's not just that Mellan came up with this concept and his adept ability to really understand, subtle nuances of expression in an uncanny way, like Rembrandt understood the corners of the mouth and the corners of the eye to get across emotion. But the words that he chooses are also remarkable. So I wanted to zero in on that. At the bottom of this lovely shroud are letters that are essentially stitched into the fabric, would you say? Mm-hmm. And they say, Formatur unicus una, which translates into the one and only made from the one and only. The one and only Christ made from the one and only God. And then dead center on the bottom of that cannot be imitated. Right, you can't be God. But what's also wonderful is that Mellan is giving us not only the spiritual reading, but he also signs it. Mellan GP F 80 means he signs it essentially Claude Mellan Gallicus, the Frenchman, painted and made this in the King's Building, which was the Louvre, in 1649.
What? Wait a minute.
That's what that all means.
No, I believe you.
And so the thing is that he cannot be imitated. It cannot be altered. It cannot be repeated. This one and only image came from the one and only Claude Mellan.
Gotcha.
Sonia Del Rey discusses this. It's just so beautifully discussed in her short article. But it's also actually brought to life really well in another thing from Risdi's. And by the way, Anne, they say...
Print? Lots of people on the print. There were tons of them. There must have been.
I want one and I want it now. But the thing that this should make Anne all happy... They refer to this as an indexical quality to Mellan's engraving.
Wait a minute.
Would you like to discuss that?
Wait a minute. You'll have to say more about what they mean. Why did they say that?
The title of this engraving references the Sudarium, a handkerchief, or literally sweat cloth, of St. Veronica, exemplary of the relic class known by the Greek term ekeiropoeta, made without hand. Think, for instance, of the Turin shroud or the Manopolo image. Veronica's veil was supposedly emblazoned with Christ's image via impression after she blotted the inky blood from his face on Calvary, a process that itself resembles a kind of printmaking. Mm-hmm. There is indeed an indexical quality to Mellan's engraving, making it feel intimately connected to Christ, an effect that only intensified when viewed closely. I love this. Even for secular viewers, this image might prompt reflections on the magical quality of mimesis. I'll stop there, but it's so beautifully.
I mean, mimesis is just imitation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I get the indexical part where
the indexical,
where the image of the face is transferred by the means of wiping the sweat. Like I can kind of put indexical in there.
Yeah, there's photo impression.
But I don't know how the next step is indexical because he's made the making of the thing isn't.
Do you think they're showing off with their happy big
anyway
$3 word?
Maybe. I mean, indexical means that it references itself. So
but it does.
The way. Say more.
Because it references because it's made it can only be made this one way, and
Because he says it so?
no, it's the way that the image has been laid onto the plate. That's the only way it could possibly have been done. You can.
Oh,
I'm throwing it out there just to piss you off, and it's working.
it's
It's syntactical. Risty said so.
I don't think so.
You can cut it out. It's fine. All right. Despite the fact that some of us may not read this as a spiritual object, there are those. Yes, go ahead. I know.
No, I think it carries as well as any religious object that I've ever seen because of the intrigue of how he made it. Mm-hmm. It sucks you in unlike any other image of Christ that I've seen. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't repel you because of the horror of the crucifixion or anything. Right. So it's kind of this moment of...
It's pathos. It's
reflection and
compassion.
Pain. And, it's not...
And there's blood,
gore.
But it's not gore. But but the blood, the sweat, and the tears are there. But it's so full of
and he looks
care.
Just so resigned.
Yeah,
like Harry Potter going into the forest for the last time.
Okay.
Right? I am going to die. I know I'm going to die. I have to die for the good of all mankind.
Yeah, but that's J.K. Rowling, and she doesn't like trans people, so to hell with her.
Oh, well, all right.
That's all right. But remember, you will die. I have to do something. Okay, we're going to be done soon. I can't help. Okay.
God.
But one other thing I wanted to share with you, if you want to get past the spiritual aspect of it, I love the fact that somebody took the time to say it is a 150-meter long groove.
Somebody calculated it?
Yeah.
Holy crap.
And then I thought, well, okay, what does that mean? And that's 492 feet. And being from Iowa, I want to know distances. When I was raised, it was like a mile is 5280 or it's 16 city blocks. And so that made me start looking it up. And I thought, okay, if we wanted to figure out how far that one line that he carved that went from the center out and built not just the head, but also the veil and also the halo and the edges and even where the cloth starts to curl up, it's essentially almost a tenth of a mile. It's 0.09 of a mile. Or let's say that it is a block and a half if you're in Chicago. I know it sounds strange, but
that's a lot of copper.
It's a lot of carving. Mm-hmm. I want to know how long it took him and how much time he had to stop and breathe and think and slow down and couldn't have too much coffee and you couldn't have too much footfall in the house.
Well, that's my question. Like, do you just start with one single line that has no thicknesses?
And then pump it up?
And then pump it up. Wouldn't you have to?
That's the first time I've ever thought of it that way. But I'm not convinced that that's because it starts to undulate.
Yes, it does undulate.
So that at first you would say, oh, yeah, sure, you're puffing it up. And that's true until you get out into the cheeks where it starts to do its thing. And then the hair starts to do its thing. And so then you're like, you cannot be repeated. Who else except Reynos, who did essentially try to repeat it and almost completely knocked it out of the park. In fact, I would own that, Reynos, but it's great. It goes at the end of this. You have to give him his props.
I know, we do.
We totally do. So the point of all of this is to say many of the things that Claude Mellan accomplished with this one image was a way of separating himself from the entire pack of people making any kinds of engraving at the time. I mean, this is your Everest. This is your landing the quintuple on one foot at the Olympics. And he totally does it. That's one, perfect spiral out and no wobbling. It's just astonishing what he does. And so that establishes him as if he hadn't already been sought out as a portraitist. It establishes him quite well. And the other huge French portraitist at the time, because by the middle of the 17th century, France was like blowing up with all of these folks that really do want their portraits made because they're understanding the power of portraiture now. The other big dude at the time was Robert Nanteuil. You want to say that for us?
Robert Nanteuil.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
But Nanteuil was the other, well, there were two others, but I'm going to say it was these two. During Mellan's and Nanteuil's time, this is the best thing. It makes me so happy. I remember the first time I read this in Linda Holt's book. It was that during their lives, Louis XIV in 1660, because he was already loving the concept of having portraits made, he declares in his Edict of Saint-Jean-de-Luz, 1660, he says that all French engravers are from this point forward entitled to the privilege of other artists. He's now pronouncing the engravers free of being mechanical artists, and they are now with fine artists. And I can't help but think that the Sudarium didn't clinch some of that.
Oh, I would. Of course. How could it not? I have to tell you, when I was at the National Gallery back in the 90s, we took in a gift of, I don't know, it's like 200 portrait prints.
Were you bored out of your skull?
I was bored out of my skull.
Absolutely.
And some of them were so bad. There was tons of them of the Cardinal Richelieu for whatever reason. But the thing that was really hard, and this is all pre-internet people, was that it was all Latinized, and you couldn't figure out who the heck anybody was.
Agreed.
Because you had no way to do the research on who they were.
Right.
It was really
pre-internet,
hard.
right? And that's even now, even with the internet, I'm annoyed, and I would like to have this part of the conversation kept in. Even with the internet now, I haven't had the opportunity at the time to decipher what's said there because it's beefy and meaningful. All the Latinized stuff to be so important. Let's get to the point where Louis XIV, who is now getting really close to taking on the kingship officially, is also completely enamored of what portraits can do. He is absolutely in love with them. And so Louis XIV, has been using them and understands that portraiture is a hugely important vehicle as propaganda, and he sees that there's this long line of great portraits that could have been used. He understands that Titian and Velázquez and Rubens and Van Dyck have all been making these great portraits, and now he, the up-and-coming Sun King, can really capitalize on that. I'm going to read you a wonderful passage straight from Linda Holtz because it makes a whole lot of sense. Louis, as in Louis XIV, decree tells us much about the status of printmaking in the 17th century. Although it was clearly an important enterprise, the king still had to plea for its recognition as a liberal art by undermining its craft. The edict argued that etchings and engravings depended upon the imagination of their authors and cannot be subject to any laws other than those of their genius. This art has nothing in common with the crafts and manufactures. In order to separate printmaking further from craft, the decree also championed the individuality of each engraver's style. How could that not be a direct connection to somebody like Mellan, who had created this style, which is entirely his own, that no one else is working with? The only other huge portraitist that's killing it is Robert Nanteuil, and Louis will have his portrait made by Robert. But in the meantime, we know that Louis XIV has his portrait made by Mellan in 1667. And here he is at the ripe age of, 23 years old.
This is a couple years after the Sudarium.
7 years, yes.
7 years. And this
I lied. That's not true. 18 years after the Sudarium.
Yeah, so 18 years later, this looks kind of amateur.
It's strange and it's small.
It's weird.
But it's still, if we were to zoom in, you could still see his line.
Oh, sure. I mean, he's an accomplished engraver, no doubt.
And he's got those dopey little Louis XIV shoes on,
sure.
And he's got the little lion, he's a fleur-de-lis, and he's got the code de Louis.
It could be an early state also.
I would hope so.
Yeah, it's looking very light, I guess.
It is light. But then we also have to wonder, okay, let's see, how old is Claude getting?
True.
But by this time, he's literally sitting with the king. He's written from a family, son of
we weren't sure.
Tax collector or something, and, coppersmiths, and now he is part of the court. And he has a name, and he is important enough to be representing Louis XIV, who, by the way, at this time has now made sure that the French Academy of Architecture, Painting, and Sculpture is becoming such a thing, and it has been re-established 1663, and they've gotten it to the point where not only is printmaking, it's an art form, it's not a mechanical art, that ultimately, also during the reign of Louis XIV, printmaking will become one of the forms of art that can also join the French Academy.
Oh.
1704, printmakers are allowed to apply to the Academy with 2 portraits.
Engraved portraits.
Engraved portraits.
No matter how small.
No matter how small, and be adjudicated in by the other artists. So that means that printmaking has gone from being a mechanical art, which was just an armorer's craft, and we're making impressions of patterns that we were putting on somebody's, scabbard or whatever, to making fine art that is understood to be something to advance the careers and the thinking and the education of others. So It puts Mellan at this point squarely into the realm of the high Baroque style, which is Louis XIV all the way. Now, I have to tell you that I think that French Baroque engraving is far more interesting than French Baroque classical painting. Come on, French painting is all Poussin and classical, and that's what the Academy says it's supposed to be. But if you start thinking about what the other art forms can do, and we think about the way that Louis wants to have himself depicted. For instance, Louis invites Bernini up to France to do this bust sculpture of him.
Is that marble?
Yes,
Good
and it's by
Lord.
Bernini.
What?
None other than Bernini.
I didn't know he could sculpt. Did I? Oh, yes, St. Teresa.
St. Teresa. But look, it's freaking Louis with his big old, I'm the Sun King, I'm the lion, I'm the frame, the
that
hair.
billowing
Isn't that,
claw.
it's like
It's
absolutely
insane.
Baroque. And you can see that totally play out as though Mellan could totally do that. You can see why
Yeah, sure.
why Bernini would love Mellan to do his work. And then we have the engraved portraits, like the one by Robert Nanteuil of Louis XIV, from only 5 years after the one that Mellan did. Nanteuil and Mellan have really proven that French portraiture is all that. It's bizarrely naturalistic. It's bizarrely almost photographic.
Mm-hmm.
Huge lion's mane's hair and all of this trompe l'oeil. Look at the Herculean, the lion skin, because it's strange, and he's connected to the historic past, and the flesh is all there. And Louis.
Well, it's interesting because it just dawned on me.
Yeah.
I love it when I get these.
That's what it's supposed to happen.
That the print offers a much greater opportunity for these embellishments that the sculpture does not.
Absolutely.
Unless the sculpture is set in some sort of architectural surround or something.
Nope, it's obviously a bust that just sort of sits there, and it's a knockout.
It is a knockout.
But do you imagine Bernini got up there and like, fuck this France bullshit, and he just goes right back to Rome. This is dumb. He hates it. And then the other thing I'm showing is the Liberace portrait that Hyacinthe Rigaud had done of Louis.
Rigaud, right.
Yeah, in 1709. But you can see that Louis, I mean, if you were to think about Versailles, which he's busily building at this time, and his face is plastered on everything, that portraiture is an absolutely essential part of that. And Louis is understanding that. And he's saying printmaking, he understands, as many others are starting to figure out, that this is how I can prove I'm a real deal. In some ways, this isn't that different than the triumphal arch of Emperor Maximilian being splattered on those city walls throughout his realm. Right? Mm-hmm. But now Louis is doing it with these prints that, I can own a Louis XIV. Ooh, neat, Wouldn't it be cool if I could have an Obama engraving?
Well, there people have portraits of JFK still up in their houses.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Some of us even make them ourselves. So that is where I wanted to head with that. So the thing that I also wanted to bring to our attention was that Mellan, he's done 400 engravings, and he's doing everything by the book. If you think about it, he can do all of these different kinds of genres of image making. If we were going to talk about what the Academy thinks is important, at the very top of the heap is history painting.
This is the famous hierarchy of
academic hierarchy subjects that I always use every semester to say, what's the most important? So, of course, biblical, because they're Christians, and then mythological, and then actual events. Thank you, Kello. Portraits, royalty, historical figures, and common people. Below that, landscapes. Below that, still life. And below that, genre, scenes from everyday life. And history painting is at the very top. Why?
It's important.
Well, it includes more people. It takes up more space. It requires much more stage set designing.
I thought it was more lessonful.
Absolutely. There's more lesson, but even in this painting that I'm showing you by Zoffany, which is the jurors of the London Academy, even in this, that's a history painting, and you think how many different figures had to be placed in that space, what's in the space, whose faces are where, how do you lead our eye through? The scale of history paintings tends to be much bigger, and of course they're very lessonful, absolutely. Landscapes, if you're Poussin and you're French and it's the 17th century, has to be all lessonful with all that stuff from the past, and it's all set up on a formulaic kind of a thing. So I wanted to share with you a few of the images that Mellan did of, let's say, religious scenes. And so here's one. It's Moses before the burning bush.
Blake.
Yeah, I know, right?
Oh, that's so weird.
But it's Blake before Blake was even alive. This is done in 1663.
Jesus.
But you can still see it's so... Look at the flames. It's Mellan. It is totally Mellan. But you can also see, can you see the golden mean that's absolutely present in that? It's okay, so I'm doing that. Now, I cannot find the date for this, but I gotta tell you, I am all about this image. I love this. It is so many kinds of what the fuck. Right?
Oh, my head.
I had to show this to you. Isn't it amazing? Okay, Ann, you tell them what you're seeing.
It's so 19th century.
You're right, but it's,
the British pre-Raphaelites or somebody. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it's Adam and Eve at the foot of the cross. Now, I didn't realize they were at the foot of the cross because they were about bazillions of years earlier, but
they're being saved because of this.
So there's the cross that's coming down in the middle, and you have death, the figure, the skeleton, kind of
the place of the skull,
holding his head, the skull of Golgotha, and then there's a little snake coming up between Adam's legs.
There happens to be a really strategically placed, I don't know, is that a fig tree leafy thing?
Yeah, and then Eve is on the right, and she's looking at us kind of like the woman on the Déjeuner sur l'Air.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
But with a kind of a
us.
Rubenesque kind of a body.
And she's got her arm up to her forehead.
Which she's holding the apple to her head.
Because it's her fault, of course.
Of course.
And then Adam is to the left, and he takes up most of the foreground. Well, he's holding an apple, too.
Oh, good. About time.
Yeah, and he's all like mansplaining to her. Look at his
legs
wide open.
Well,
It's ridiculous. And then there's this weird chain behind him, and then on the lower right there's like a rose thorn bush thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, remember Mary was a rose without thorns. So look that they're all saved, and look at the clouds like.
Wait, that's Mary personified over there. What's the chain?
I think our souls are unencumbered after we've been saved, I guess, because look, it's broken. Okay. And there's all kinds of little stuff that if we were up on our Latin, we'd probably be doing a whole lot. Look at this great banderole going back into the air. And look how it echoes the snake.
Yeah.
And these clouds. Is this not the most funky, wonderful, weird, absurd thing?
That is the most funky, weird, absurd thing I've ever seen.
And it looks, actually, doesn't it look like the cross is pretty much coming straight out of Adam's?
Yes.
Package business thing. Isn't that awesome? What the hell were you thinking, Claude? Isn't that amazing? I saw that. I'm like, this is going in.
This is better than Rembrandt's couple doing it in the edge of the field.
Or even woman making water. I know, right? It's like, hey, we did it, but now we're at the foot of the cross.
Goodness.
I mean, we're being irreverent, but at the same time, it's really something, right? You can see the geometries in this. And you look at, he's echoing her. Remember, this is 3/4 of his other output is all this churchy stuff.
Wow.
So be happy we talked about portraits in the face of Christ. So I'm reminding you briefly of Nicolas Poussin, who was the big hot shot, and how there were tons of reproductive engravings done after him.
Yawn.
I know, and I always feel guilty because I just see how I put down the here I put at the very bottom that Rembrandt is the size of a postage stamp because Poussin just thought Rembrandt was the total crap.
Ugh.
But let's not even talk about how glorious Claude Lorraine is. But anyway, or how much Cézanne loved freaking Poussin and Piero della Francesca. He wanted to remake his art with the rigor of the old masters.
Oh, interesting.
I know, and that's why I can't explain Cézanne either.
Oh, well, there you go.
I'm
fascinated by the French attachment to landscape suddenly as settings for things that are happening, stories, etc. But all of a sudden, the landscape takes over the entire thing,
but it has to be peopled with like the entrance of the Empress of the Queen of Sheba,
but still, it's a funny switch suddenly to me.
But it's still, I mean, if you think about a Poussin landscape, it's so improved. It's so regularized. I don't have one here for you to look at immediately, but it's just
There's a formula.
Totally. And so when I show you this interesting scene of Claude Mellan's, Venus and Adonis, he's been killed when he was out hunting.
What?
This is from 1662, and you can totally see that Mellan is doing his job, and he's portraying this mythological scene in a geometrically composed landscape, and the figures look sculptural like the age of yore.
It almost looks like he's done the figures and somebody else did the rest.
I know.
It doesn't match.
I know, and I'd see this is bad, because Ann and I should really be very like the news and not have any editorial, but come on, this is like such a drag, right? But then it's not, because if you really zoom in on it, there you are. I see you hiding. If you zoom in and you look at Adonis laying down, you go, Claude Mellan, I see you. You're still in there, buddy. You're still doing your cross contour, and it's really delightful. He's really perfected the line, but I feel as though he's using his magical wand on this required thing that the Academy says you have to do. And so I'm just so pleased when he gets to do himself. If I give you this close-up of just Adonis's shoulder, you go, there you are. I see you. I'm glad you're still in there.
Yeah.
And so, the last part of his life, he's still doing things like he does everything. He does, religious scenes, he does mythological scenes, he does portraits, and he does a whole bunch of these reproductive engravings of ancient sculptures. And I'm showing Anne run here of Mnemosyne. She's the goddess of memory, but the way that he is giving print life to a sculptural form. But look how she's just kind of floating there.
Yeah, it's weird.
It is odd by this time. It's French classical Baroque.
Where are we, 1670?
And people are gobbling this up. But don't forget, he's up there now.
But we don't have Piranesi doing those vases.
It's only up to 1670.
Right.
Piranesi's a whole century later.
Right, so Milan's way ahead of everybody.
Well, in a way, he is.
Right.
I just, when I look at some of these other things, it looks like it's so uncomfortable. He's doing what he's supposed to do in his time. But when you see him get to do what he's supposed to do and he's inquisitive, it's really exciting. Don't forget, he's still doing these thesis broadsides, which are very cool. Here's a late one, another thesis scene of Guillaume de Longueuil, who is going to do his thesis defense in philosophy. But he's doing everything he's supposed to in that academic hierarchy. He's showing he can play the game. Religious, mythological, allegorical, portraiture, illustrations of the famous sculptures, sure, all of that. But here's the part that I love most, is that he's also...
What?
I had
the fuck is that?
This has to be a closer. Now, admittedly, we're jumping back, 35 years.
Doesn't matter.
On his way back to Paris from Rome in 1637, he stops at Aix-en-Provence, and he meets this dude, Nicolas Claude Fabry de Persec. And he's a French humanist, and Pierre Gassendi, a theologian, who have this passionate interest in astronomy. And they happen to be looking at the moon with this really rather new piece of equipment called the
telescope.
Hey, Callot was looking through a telescope in one of his scenes too.
He was.
Right. And so the telescope had been invented about 1608 by the Dutch. Well, here are these, French folk looking at the moon, and they say, hey, Claude, would you sketch the moon looking through the telescope and then do some engravings? And how could we not share with you these images that he engraved with his freaking parallel wonderness? Here's a view of the full moon, and you can see the craters and the explosion of where the asteroids hit it. And isn't this uncanny valley?
It's gorgeous.
I would eat this for breakfast. It's so damn beautiful, and he's so fascinated. He's drawn what he's seen through the telescope, but wait, there's more. He did 3 of them. I wish he'd spent more time at X.
I wish we had these. Oh my God.
The moon in its first quarter. Oh. Can you look at the way those craters look?
Yeah.
Look at his observation. That's that drawing, his ability to see. And that was my point when Simon Vouet said, you need to draw. Drawing is the basis of everything. And I keep saying, okay, guys, you got to draw. Why do I have to take drawing? I can do this in Photoshop. I can do this in Procreate. Because if you can draw, you own it. If you can see it and you can repeat it with your own hand and mind, you own it. I had a little tiff with a girl the other day. She was trying to show me something in Procreate. I said, what is this? Is this Photoshop? It's Procreate. And I said, okay. I said, when will I ever have cause to need that? I said, why don't you speak German? Why can't you tell me what 7 means? Can you write for me in cursive?
You didn't.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yes, I did. Why the fuck do I need Procreate? I can write in cursive and I can tell you what 7 means. And I can draw. And I can draw what I see. Right? And I don't have to go point, click, point, hey, internet. If you think about what he is capable of seeing and then carving into a freaking copper plate, that's excellence.
Oh my God! Yes.
That's why and that's why these. Look at this. This is the third of the 3. The moon and its I know. They're just breathtaking. And look at his parallel lines. Come on, how could we not finish on? Right. Come on.
Well,
come on. So you guys are gonna really.
We got to go a hunting.
I know. There's just this one last one I have to show you. This is the penitent Peter or the remorse of St. Peter. And yes, it's, a biblical figure out in the middle of nowhere, and it's kind of geometrically set up. But I want to point out that this was done when he was 89 years old. And the fact is that he is still engraving, and he's still using his magic mark, and maybe the marks aren't as crisp and deep as they were. He's 89 years old. And that, to me, makes me think about Michelangelo at 89, carving 9 days before he died. When he was 70, he said, I'm still learning. Here is Claude Mellan still engraving his faith, St. Peter in the desert in remorse. It's like, is this a self-portrait? Who knows? But I look at this and, he never stopped growing either. He was still trying. And it reminds me of this. I would encourage everyone to read a book. It's called Old Masters and Young Geniuses. The second title is 2 Life Cycles of Artistic Creativity. There are those artists that start off young and make a big, big bang. And then there are those artists that stay the course and they're there every step of the way. Titian, Bernini, Milan, Willem de Kooning, people that last a long time and are still making and they're not painting the same painting they did every single year. They're still growing. And
Old Masters and Young Geniuses is a book
by David
Galenson.
And it's just lovely. When I see things like this is what gives me hope. I think of this as something I need to emulate. I just want to continue to make stuff until hell won't have it and I fly into the side of a cliff because I'm bored.
Oh, Jesus.
I'm not, I don't want to just dwindle. Look at this guy. He's 89 years old and he's still pushing a beer in through copper. And this is a guy that was looking through a telescope. And this is a guy that dreamt up a way of seeing the face of Christ with one freaking spiral line. And he established his calling card and he could use it. And everybody go, oh, please do me. No, do me. Everybody will remember me now, leaving Louis XIV. I'll change print history for you. You're that good. I think that's why I got stuck on Claude Mellan, and I kind of our man dies in 1688, and
the year after the St. Peter. And by the way, the plate is 18 inches by 12.
Jeepers, he can afford big copper now.
It's big.
Well, more power to you, old dude, because I'm impressed with him. And so he even continues to inspire people. There's a wonderful book of all of his portraits that was published in 1837.
Oh, gosh.
And then I think about contemporary artists that like to emulate him. And Ann will tell you about this guy because he's pretty wonderful. Go ahead.
This is an engraving by Evan Lindquist, who is still working. And
as an engraver,
always has. And has done a wonderful series of engravers engraving themselves, basically, or learning how to engrave. So he's done images of Durer engraving, and there are all sorts of them, including Milan and Hayter, and
all the biggies,
and Schongauer, etc.
I kind of want this one right here.
I know, it's pretty great. And so this one is Milan engraving his self-portrait. So he's emulating this self-portrait, but in this swirling single line situation.
I think was still probably an uber big challenge for them. And then the last is this absolute young pup who has been able to take engraving to a place that Stanley William Hayter wanted it to be. And tell us all about your friend here, Renus.
Yeah. So the wonders of the internet mean that you get to know printmakers from far off places. So way over in Eastern Europe, in Latvia, there's a young man named Renus Galaitis who did a Milan-esque self-portrait with a single line engraved from the tip of his nose of himself holding an iPhone.
Yet he's bearded and he has long hair.
He has long hair, which he's not.
And the fact that he's using the iPhone as a way to record his face recording, it's very smart.
It is smart. And he's got some great videos online of him and his process, and they're really great to watch. So
I just love the fact that there are still people that are like, holy shit, Claude Mellan, oh my God, I got to try that.
Yeah.
And here's proof that at least 2 guys could pull it off.
And thinking about
very special guys that can do that.
That's the truth. When you think of Milan and think of that as his calling card, as Adam and Eve was for Rembrandt, and the 3 prints for Durer, this could be called
absolutely
Renus's calling card.
It absolutely is.
I bought a print from him recently, and he included one of these in the package.
You lucky, because that's the one I would get.
Well, I have one.
Well, okay, we should talk. Renus,
Dear Rainus.
We're plugging you because
if you're listening,
I'm really proud of you. He's just a pup.
He is a pup, and
has he just crested 30?
I think so.
He's a kid.
He is a kid, and we love
killing it.
We love your work.
So the things that people can do. We didn't know anything about this guy.
And we just popped up out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean it's like, okay, I need to know more about. And still, I think he deserves a show, don't you?
Rainus?
Well, how about a Rainus and Claude show?
Oh, there you go.
We're going to even throw some Evan Lindquist in there. What the hell?
There you go.
Wouldn't that be
Masters
neat?
of engraving.
Indeed. And there you have it, folks. That's it for us tonight. We've been really well behaved. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you have a good time looking at the images and play with the zoom feature on all the links. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I feel like when you're far away from an engraving, you can write it off as being, as we've described it, state or whatever. But boy, once you get in there, things start happening, and you find things you would just be so surprised by. So
well, it's that concept of skating on a surface. I still think of it as figure skating, or even as a bow moves across a string on an instrument to create a sound. Actually, many's the class that we would use the Claude Mellan Face of Christ, when my former spouse and I would do this entire class on how to give visual life to music, and thinking about the thicks and the thins, and how the weight and the speed and the placement, and how you use the material and have it become an extension of yourself and your heart. That's what that Face of Christ is. But, it didn't come out of nowhere. And it's not his one-hit wonder. He actually did some... Hell, man, I'd hold those 3 moons in 5 seconds.
I'm going to shop for them right now.
Yeah, let's go do that. All right, see you guys later. We're going to go shopping.
Thanks for listening. And there you have it, Claude Mellan and the Sudarium. Not so, isn't it? Thanks for listening to this episode with me and Tru, talking about Claude Mellan, one of our favorite artists, but really seriously an oddball. Thanks, as always, to Tru for being the SME, you know what that means, the subject matter expert, and to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. I'd also like to send a very special thank you to Dan Fury of Extension Audio for fixing some really wonky audio for me. I do not know what's going on. Thank you, Dan. Let's see. Oh, the images we talked about are over on the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com, and you can also hit the support and donate button and help us keep the lights on. I really appreciate it. I think that's it. We'll see you next time.